welcome back to a little reading vlog. I'm so excited because I haven't filmed one of these in a really long time. I think honestly since the end of 2024, which is crazy. Honestly, it's mostly because my reading is so sporadic and also like kind of so boring that I don't know how to like stitch it together to make something interesting. But I'm finally kind of feeling back in the groove of reading. I just finished Heartland by Banu Mushtaq, which was my July book club pick, and I'll talk about this later in this video. And then I also started The Girls by John Bowen on my Kindle, which both are books I talked about in sort of like my summer TBR list, and both have been so good so far. And I don't know, I'm just feeling back in the reading groove. I feel very excited to pick up these books, and especially The Girls. I felt like I don't want to stop reading, which is such a good feeling. I'm so glad to be back here, and I'm so excited to be sharing my thoughts on both of these with you guys, and also just show you how I'm like making time for reading in my schedule, and kind of going around Seoul, hopefully to some like cozy cafes, and all in all having sort of like a calm, cozy reading vibe that we can share together. I'm running late to go to a cafe and do some work, so I'm just going to give you a really quick summary of what The Girls is about if you haven't watched my previous video. Basically, it's a book I believe from the 80s by a British author, John Bowen, and it's set in the English countryside, and it features a couple, Sue and Janet, who run sort of like a really cozy like shop and live this like very cute countryside life together. And it kind of turns darker is my understanding. It hasn't quite gotten there yet, but so far it's been super fun and cozy, and also the writing style so far has been so up my alley. It's kind of humorous, and it makes like very mundane moments really interesting to read, and there's kind of like ridiculous like surrealism about it, which I've talked about this before, but that's something I really enjoy in books, is like books that take the mundane and make it something really interesting and kind of surreal and almost like folktale-y as well. And there's a very tiny bit of that in this, which I absolutely love, and I really like, I think, like the British humor in it as well. And yeah, it's been super fun. I'll tell you guys more about sort of like my concrete thoughts and also the progression of the book in a sec, but for now I think I'm gonna go to a cafe that I love in the center of Seoul and get some work done. I'm just working on translations as always, and also if I can find a free sec afterwards I might do a tiny bit of reading and then come back home. Let's go. So remember how I said this book hadn't gotten dark yet? Well, it just did, and it did so fast. I don't want to spoil anything because I want to make sure you guys can read it, but it was so fun to read just that little part, and now we are in a completely different vibe of the book, and I just think that's like so exciting. I'm so curious as to what's going to happen, and yeah, I really need to read the rest of it. Luckily, it's been such a quick read, honestly, and this is something I wanted to talk about, is just that the writing style is so fun. I know I mentioned this earlier, but it feels so incredibly seamless, which I love. Like the writing just kind of falls to the background and the story really comes alive, and like the descriptions of the characters and everything is so well done. Their dialogue is really funny and just perfect, and I feel like it's such a good example of a lot of descriptions that I could honestly read forever, like of super cozy activities, because they live in sort of a rural area in England, so it's like, you know, making cheese and like selling things at like a county art fair and stuff that is like super cozy and fun. but then at the same time nothing drags on for too long, and there's a lot of like punchy dialogue and sort of like funny cuts, like kind of like very sarcastic classic British humor moments that I absolutely adore. At the same time, it makes me a little bit curious about if there's like a grand effect the author's trying to pull off by the end. So I'm just really like enjoying this so far. Probably one of my favorite reads of late, maybe in the whole year. I feel like as someone who would probably say that literary fiction is like her main book taste, I sometimes forget that there's like an art to creating very simple, seamless storytelling that just like kind of falls to the back so that you can really enjoy the characters in the world and like completely get absorbed, if that makes sense. Like the language on the page and the words on the page are providing no wall, basically. You're not really noticing the writing as much as you're just getting sucked into the story. And although I love talking about writing choices in works of literature, and I find like writing style and sort of play and progression of language really interesting in literature in general, there's something to be said about just like losing yourself in a book, and I feel like that can be trickier with works that are dealing with maybe more like intellectual themes or trying to do something with language. And so I feel like I just really appreciate that in this book, like the writing is fantastic, don't get me wrong, like, it's like so good, but at the same time it seems to be really truly serving as a tool for you to see the characters, for you to kind of feel the suspense, sort of the absurdity and also the coziness of this like English countryside world that he's painting. And yeah, I just love it so much so far. I feel like it's really kind of sparked an interest to read his other works as well, and also in general to just like find books that feel similar, because these are the books I do tend to enjoy the most. This is the first book I've ever read from like the McNally Jackson series where they like rediscover old gems that they think more people should read, and I'm fully convinced and fully sold. Like I'm like, I trust your taste, so I think I'm gonna look into that a bit more, but otherwise I'm gonna try and read a bit more today and see where we get to next time. I still need to update y'all on Heartlamp, so I'll try and do that in the next couple of days, but for now, let's get reading.
묻었으니까 나중에 하나 더 놔둬볼?
Decorate themselves.
So before I finish and get into the girls, I wanted to talk to you guys about Heartlamp as well. Like I mentioned, I finished this in the last week and really enjoyed it. If you saw my last video, you'll know that this is the 2025 International Booker Prize winner, as well as my July book club pick, and so I was really excited about this one. I wanted to see what sort of set it apart from the other Booker candidates, and since it's a prize for translation as well, I wanted to see what the translation looked like. And actually, I think that's like one of the elements that I really enjoyed the most, was just seeing a lot of translation choices. The translator is Deepa Basti, and she kept a lot of the original Kannada in terms of the ways characters like address each other, and also sort of like some of the idioms as well, I think were probably directly translated and things like that, and I found it really interesting. I think this is like translator by translator and also reader by reader, like your taste as well. But I think this book was able to run a really fine line between a world and a context that I personally am not super familiar with, but then also showing sort of like the depth and complexity and like the fun and everything of that world, while keeping a lot of sort of the texture and the relationships and the community of the original. Most of the stories about different women kind of in different situations where they're facing some sort of injustice or prejudice, or maybe even just like sorrow or grief or something like that in their lives, and sort of how the community assembles around them and how they decide to like live and survive through it despite a lot of societal sort of pressures and forces that are reinforcing a lot of these prejudices and sort of injustices. In some ways, I think the best story to encapsulate that is the last one, which is called Be a Woman Once, O Lord, and I really thought that was exactly how a lot of the characters felt throughout the book. One of the elements I loved most about this book was that the community within it just felt so alive, and each of the stories has a lot of characters featured, which I do think, to be honest, adds to the confusion of reading it. Like, I wouldn't say it's the easiest read of all time, but at the same time, I think that sort of vibrancy is really captured in the writing and the stories themselves, which I loved and appreciated. The only critique I have of it is that because there are so many elements to these stories and a lot of characters that interact with each other in a very distinct world, I think if you don't comprehend that world right away, it can be kind of tough to get into and also tough to follow, especially because they are short stories and it kind of switches pretty often. At the same time, I feel like I got the hang of it probably midway through the book, and I was pretty accustomed to the world and sort of like the exchange of characters and everything by the end. I think there's also a lot of humor in Mushtaq's writing and also in the characters themselves, which I really loved. Like, humor is a coping mechanism here, and also irony and all those things, and I loved reading that. I think, though, that the voices themselves of the characters and of the narrators and the stories, they don't feel like they'll last with me as long. Like, I just don't think that they were as punchy as maybe some of the other things I've read that have felt very, like, unforgettable characters, if that makes sense. The reason I say that is because the only other Booker sort of long list nominee that I've read this year is Reservoir Bitches, and personally, while I see why this might be a more literary pick, quote unquote, or like also maybe a more interesting book in terms of translation, especially because compared to Spanish there aren't as many Kannada to English translations in the literary sphere, I thought that book, Reservoir Bitches, was a little bit more just like what I wanted in terms of a short story collection about women. Granted, it might be because the writer, I think, is younger and it feels closer to sort of the world I know as well, but the voices and the stories and the humor was incredibly bold and sort of like punchy and in your face, and I really loved reading it. I still definitely recommend it. I think it's absolutely worth reading, and I'm really glad that it won the Booker to just get more sort of exposure and attention on a really great writer and great translator. And yeah, I'm really excited to see more of Mushtaq's work. So those are my thoughts on Heartlamp. I think the next time I come in here, I'm going to try and finish The Girls and let you guys know what I think about that as well. I'm enjoying it so much right now. Like, might be one of my most enjoyable reads of 2025 so far. So I cannot wait to tell you what I think about the end and everything. But yeah, I'll see you then. Wow, so what can I say about The Girls? This is definitely the coziest book I read all year, and the funny thing is I don't think I'm a huge fan of like cozy books per se, or maybe it's just that I don't like books that are like marketed as cozy books and like forced to be cozy, if that makes sense. Like, I feel like books with like bookstore in the title, or like forests, or like really beautiful cafes on the cover or something are not automatically my favorite. I tend to actually stray away from them because I feel like sometimes the inside is mostly fluff and the cover is what's like the most beautiful part about the book. But this is genuinely such a cozy read, and it's also like my favorite type of cozy. There are two main characters, Sue and Janet, who are partners and live in the English countryside together, and their lives, like, they own like this little shop where they sell a bunch of like homemade goods, and they talk about like beekeeping, I'm pretty sure, or like the dairy and making like, you know, sewing things, and it's just the coziest vibe. Like the setting is incredibly peaceful and serene, and the writing captured so much of the charm of that world and sort of like the English countryside at the time. I also loved how John Bowen wrote about these characters. They feel so real and relatable, but also like perfectly flawed, and so much of the time I found them very adorable and almost like just so lovable, if that makes sense, without being forced. I just think it's like their relationship is so genuine and so loving, and also the other characters that fit in and out of their lives also just feel like such real people. And I think the whole story, even though the setting is kind of idyllic, and even though the things that happen are, you know, not the most realistic in the end, I think that the story itself feels so alive, and I think that's my favorite kind of combination of book always, is something that feels slightly heightened from reality but still manages to completely immerse you in the story and make you feel as if it's actually happening. It's told in the third person, and there's like kind of this like elusive narrator, which I really love. There are a lot of moments of like dramatic irony or just like humor about the girls or about other characters in their world. I just thought it was so funny. I found myself like chuckling and laughing, but then it was also pretty like, you know, emotional. Like I was really invested in their family and sort of like the community around them, and seeing how people kind of like rally together. This is one book where I really don't want to spoil anything, but I will say that it's just such a great mix of like suspense and curiosity once the plot really kicks up, which it happens pretty fast, I would say, in the first like third of the book. And I literally could not put it down because I was just like, what is going to happen? And I don't want to get into too much detail, but like you're rooting for different characters and yet also feeling bad for other ones. I feel like it's like a mystery and suspense story mixed with like a classic, slow, kind of ironic British novel. And I went into it thinking, you know, what is this combination gonna look like? But it was actually amazing and like kind of blew me away. And yeah, I think it's one that I would just recommend to anyone who is kind of in a reading slump. If you're looking for something that genuinely feels like it will fly by and that is really, really easy to read and like lose yourself in, like I really think it is an enjoyment and plot book first and foremost, but then also the writing is really beautiful. You really care about the characters, and in the end you kind of think about also like, you know, questions of morality, of family, of what community means and things like that, even though that's not the center of the book. Like I'm just saying there's still a lot of depth here. I wish like more people read this, and I really hope it makes the rounds of like, you know, booktube or just other bookish communities, because I would love to talk about it with people. And I will definitely be getting a physical copy for myself and maybe for my friends as well, because this one was just that good. I think it might be one of my favorite books of the year. You will see next week when I make sort of my first 6 months of the year like favorites video, I'll mention my favorite books. So we'll see if it makes the cut. But right now I'm pretty sure it will. It was so good, and I'm really happy. Like every time I make a reading vlog, I think I get a good feeling about the books, but then they always end up like blowing me away. This happened with Time of the Flies last year. So I think I need to make more reading vlogs. Maybe the like, you know, reading gods up there are sending down the best ones for me to talk about. But anyways, I'm so glad I read this. Thank you so much for coming along with me this week to sort of read The Girls and also just chat books again. I hope you enjoyed, and let me know what you're reading down in the comments below. Otherwise, if you're also in a monsoon season right now, I hope you're staying dry or staying cool or whatever, and also people in the southern hemisphere staying warm. And I will catch you guys in the next one. Bye!